Om Namo Gurudev Namo Adgure Name Jugadgure Name Satgure Name Siri Gurudeve Name. And Satnam.
Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. We're here in Laurel Canyon with an incredible teacher and a film writer and an actress and just a divine woman here on International Women's Day. Libby Lydecker, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you so much, Jake. It's a pleasure.
You talked to me in our interview before about the fact that the revolution is going to come. It's going to be a revolution of consciousness. It's not going to be one of like, well, there might be bloodshed, but you talked about that as far as shifting of consciousness. Some people will interpret that as kind of a whimsical or, you know, a little hippie kind of thing. But can you talk about what you go deeper on the idea of the revolution of consciousness in order to shift the paradigm in our culture?
Sure. Well, you know, I think if you think of the word revolution, bloodshed, warfare is nothing revolutionary, right? It's very old and clearly not working.
Never.
No. And so ultimately it has to be a revolution of consciousness, doesn't it? It has to be a shift in how we're treating one another, how we're treating the planet, how we're thinking about our own human condition is really what that becomes. And so, you know, I'm sure you're aware Marianne Williamson is running for throwing her hat into the ring for the presidential race, and she gets, you know, again to that point is that people think, oh, that's hippy dippy, that's pie in the sky, that's spiritual, you know, nonsense to talk about a Department of Peace, for example, which is something she talks about.
Oh, that's a fantastic idea.
You didn't know that? Well, she said, well, you know, she said, think of how much energy you become, what you put your energy to, right? So how much money, resources, time, manpower do we put into Department of War, right? If we allocated, and we call it something else, right? Department of Peace sounds a little maybe too hippie, too. But what if you call it Department of Sustainability, right? Some way that we could have active resources, active time and energy toward maintaining a peaceful status on the planet.
I guess more to the point, like how do you affect change? How do you try to, you know, create a revolution of consciousness in your teaching? Because we can't change all the macro stuff in the world. You see the pictures in Syria, the people being boxed into, you know, they're being treated like animals. And in some cases that's going on the border here. But how do you impact that to affect change in your world?
Well, I feel fortunate that I have this technology that I teach, which is Kundalini Yoga. I feel like in my own little way, in the opportunities that I get to extend that to my students or anyone who I come into contact with, I find that it gives people an opportunity to tap deeper within themselves and to be more connected with spirit, more connected with source. And what that does is exponential in terms of how then you start to shift, and then the people around you start to shift, and your relationship starts to shift. And I go from teaching just up the road at my children's school, teaching kids at, you know, as early as preschool through as long as they'll do it. But the kids have a different mentality about things. They have, for example, at their school, something called peace talks. And so they're taught from a very young age conflict resolution.
Right.
I mean, if that's not the most important thing that children could learn in school, how to peacefully resolve a conflict, I think our world leaders could do with some of that too. But to the point about yoga, which is what I teach, yoga and meditation, is that it really, the more calm you are, the more self-aware you are, the less reactive you are, the less prone to violence, the less prone to chaos. And as a collective evolution, the more people that are in that state, the more we can activate that part of ourselves and in each other, we are creating a more peaceful and evolved society.
How did you get to a point of that in your own evolution before you became a teacher? Can you point to the ability when you dropped from your head to your heart to your soul?
I think that's a daily process.
It is, but if you're a teacher, I mean...
You mean how I felt called
Well, you're
to
trying to get them... you said you're trying to connect them, the kids, in their own way to a meditative place.
Sure.
But you've had to do that yourself to get to where you are. So I'm just trying to point to an example
thank you
early
for
on.
asking that.
Yeah.
I think it's certainly I was on a spiritual journey for many years, and I was kind of plucked out here to be an actress, which was kind of a fluke in some ways. I was brought out to do a screen test when I was about 18.
It's better to be lucky than good, though.
What's that?
It's better to be lucky than good.
Right? Yeah. And so I was always seeking something deeper. I was always seeking something that gave me a sense of fulfillment that I wasn't finding in other ways. And I sought many different disciplines. I took many different classes, everything from Kabbalah to self-realization to, different yoga practices. And it was about 21 years ago when I went into my first Kundalini class, and it was in my teacher Gurmuk's house down in West Hollywood in this tiny little, living room. We all packed in, and I had no idea what we were doing. I was like, this is a little weird, but it feels cozy and it feels nice, and I want to do this. And so I just kept going back, and I would notice that I would first of all, I would cry a lot. A lot would come up. It would get very emotional, but it felt cathartic. It really felt like I was releasing stuff. And I would feel lighter as a result of going through it. I was going through a process. So much of what Kundalini is clearing the subconscious mind. Because Yogi Bhajan explained it this way: the more chaos you have in your subconscious, right? If you think of it like a dirty windshield, right?
Mm-hmm.
The more it's going to affect your mental state, the more it's going to bleed into neuroses, phobias, all sorts of addictions, right? The more you can clear that out, the more at peace you are, the more balanced you are. And that's what the technology gives me, and I've definitely seen it have results with other people over and over.
Why do you use the term technology?
That was a term that Yogi Bhajan...
Really?
Yeah.
Back in the late 60s he was calling it? Or, I mean, that's an interesting thing, because you're talking about being in an emotive state, but it's not like psychotherapy. I mean, you guys were doing Kundalini, you were doing yoga.
Well, if you think of it, it's like a formula, right? So if you apply this formula, you get this result. And that was the way that it's a technology. It's a technique. It's a very time-honored, practiced technique for achieving, as he explained it, a happiness in a human body. How to live a happy life in a human body. And that's something I don't think is emphasized enough for us. I think our culture is so obsessed with pleasure that we don't really know what happiness is. Pleasure is fleeting. Pleasure is, I want this, I'm going to have this makes me happy right now. But there's always a want for more, right? It's never quite filling the hole. That happiness is a joy that comes from within. And what Yogi Bhajan taught, which is something I deeply admire, is that that's your birthright. And when you can find a way to live that in a human body, what else is there?
Last time we talked about the hypnagogic state. Can you talk about that, please? I almost feel like that's
so
how.
Glad you mentioned
I know,
that.
but I feel like that's how we actually connected in some way. And I just wanted you to talk to on this International Women's Day. Can you break down the hypnagogic state and how maybe that helped put you on your path towards the divine?
Yeah, so the hypnagogic state is the state between waking and sleeping. So it's where you have access to all aspects of the mind and the higher self. And I've had the experience through many years, even very much prior to my finding this practice, where I would get messages through my dreams. I would have prophetic dreams.
Can you give an example? You did tell the one about your father.
Sure.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. He said go back to sleep. you're dreaming, and then he had a heart attack, but he was okay.
Yeah.
Is there another one?
Yeah, there's a lot. I had, for example, I would see a place in a dream, and then our family would we went, to an island in the Bahamas, and I walked around and I was like, I could tell you what was around the corner,
Right.
Odd things like that. But then,
how quickly did it happen, though? Like, I mean,
it wasn't immediate.
No,
it was
okay.
more like, I remember this from having seen it.
Wow.
But there was one in particular where a friend, ex-wife, came to me in a dream. And she told me all this information about herself, and I visited her at her home, and I wrote down when I woke up, she moved from upstate to New York to Nevada, and blah, 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 and all these details. And later when I spoke to the friend, I said, how's she doing? And he said, well, I heard she moved from upstate New York to Nevada. And I was like, wait, what? And, sure enough.
Did it impact you on a personal level, though? I mean, I'm talking to a lot of people that maybe grew up in like you talked about it very prophetically, actually, growing up in a house where, the concept of Jesus as a God was appealing, but not necessarily man's rules that applied to that.
Sure.
Was there an element of of it helped save you in some ways, finding your spirituality?
Well, for sure. I mean, I think that a spiritual journey is ultimately you finding your connection with God. A religion is usually something that's prescribed to you, right? Which you either accept or reject. There's a wonderful story in our community about a woman who was raised in the Dharma, meaning she was raised with a Kundalini yoga, very strict parent, very disciplined practice. Like
Right.
They followed all the rules.
Right.
And she, as a teenager was like, I'm out of here. Forget it. Ended up having a debilitating accident, came back into the practice, was given very specific techniques by Yogi Bhajan and specifically to help her. And she said it was through my own experience that I gained an appreciation and a love for what this practice and what these teachings give. Because she said when it was prescribed to me by my parents, it didn't have meaning. And ultimately, that's why Kundalini Yoga is so effective, because it gives you an experience of your higher self. It's not someone telling you. It's not going to someone else for that information. It's not finding a guru and saying, tell me what to think, tell me what to believe. It's about tapping into that self, that higher self within yourself, and then Then you have the experience of it, and there's nobody above that.
In your mind, what are the most important qualities of leadership when you have the floor at Wanderlust? I mean, what do you ultimately do? You want to help your students learn how to think for themselves, how to think spiritually, or and not what to think spiritually? I mean, are there core principles to leadership for you as a teacher?
Thank you. That's a good question. I would start with humility, honestly.
What does that mean? I mean, not the definition, but I mean, give it.
What it means in terms of being a spiritual leader, I think it means that, well, for example, in our practice, we tune in with the two mantras that I started. The first is the Adi mantra, which tunes you into your higher self. The second is the Mangala Charn mantra, which is for protection. And then after we tune in the students with those two mantras, we are to recite to ourselves, I am not a woman, I am not a man, I am not a person, I am not myself.
That's the teacher's oath.
I am a teacher, yes.
Okay, do that one more time.
Sure.
For the audience.
I am not a woman, I am not a man, I am not a person, I am not myself, I am a teacher. And in doing so, you basically are disconnecting from your own ego, for better or worse, right? So you can be up there thinking, oh God, I'm so insecure, I don't know what I'm saying, bad. Or you could get up there and thinking, wow, look at all these people who came to see me, I feel so powerful, also bad. Bad, being relative, but
your ego's involved. Your ego's involved, yeah.
And not really benefiting. You're not there to be of service, essentially.
Exactly.
And to be a teacher, truly, why I say humility is because it is of service. And I feel humble in my role as Yogi Bhajan put it, we are links of the golden chain. We are conduits of that energy to uplift and help people. Help people ultimately help themselves.
Can you, without mentioning names, can you talk about a student that you've, or just kind of an example of what you're talking about? How you've taken the practices from Yogi Bhajan and helped inspire your students to be themselves.
Sure. I did a women's retreat 2 weeks ago, and up in the mountains of Ojai, I have this great place where we do.
Oh, great hang up there. Yeah.
So beautiful. We had this kind of weather, just glorious sunshine, and we're up in the mountains amongst orange groves. And I had a woman who had never done Kundalini before. She came as kind of, with a friend and didn't really know what she was getting into. And we did 3 days of very intense Kundalini. And she wrote me a beautiful letter after. And she said, I was very moved. She was a medical doctor. And she said, I didn't realize how out of touch I was with myself. And it was very beautiful for me to go into that practice, close my eyes, tune into my third eye point, and connect in a way that I've never connected before. And she said, as a doctor, my parents are doctors, my husband is a doctor, this is not something that I delve into a lot. And she said, but it was so emotionally profound, and that she really wants to continue it. So that kind of thing I find enormously inspiring and exciting, when somebody says, I tapped into a deeper part of myself that I wasn't in touch with. And then there's numerous stories of people overcoming addictions, and
cats coming over stomach issues and all sorts of stuff. I mean,
certainly we don't make any medical claims, right? In terms of we're going to heal you.
You can't quantify it.
No, but that's all subjective, right? So, if you feel better, you feel better, right? And that's your path, that's your journey, and if you keep doing it, you're going to feel better. A lot of people say, well, I can't do Kundalini yoga because I still smoke, or I drink, or I still do drugs, or whatever. And my teacher Gurmukh used to always say, just add the yoga, right? You don't have to be perfect. None of us are perfect. We wouldn't be here, right? We wouldn't be in this human form. So give yourself permission.
Imperfection is perfection, right?
Yeah, and give yourself permission to make mistakes and then keep trying, right? Because the only failure is when you stop trying.
How did you view yourself, your self-worth, when you kind of just were plucked out of the air to go and become an actress? I mean, I know you went back and finished your degree, and then you eventually went back and did it again. But can you talk about how the evolution of your self-worth as it relates to just not being commodified or being looked at as strictly just of some beautiful physical being, but actually someone of service and a teacher, someone who's bright and articulate, someone who's operating on a different frequency, especially at that time? I mean, was that because there was a lot being thrown at you? You were getting contracts and agents and all sorts. I mean, essentially, you could have gone in many different directions. And I'm wondering how your self-worth has evolved over time.
Thank you for asking that. I think that's really important, actually, in terms of my evolution as a woman and seeing myself in different ways that we get cast as a woman, I think, in our society, and through different lenses. At that point...
What are those lenses? Can we just go through the lenses?
Sure.
Yeah, let's go through the lenses.
Well, I think at that point it was, I was being, sought as an ingenue, as an actress, as a, sex object, at that point. And so I was screen testing for Paramount Pictures, and I...
And you didn't even want to be an actress. I mean, the whole thing was out of the blue.
Well, sure. I mean, no, we all want to be movie stars deep down.
You were an English lit major. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, at that point I was, for sure.
So anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
But it was just, so it felt a little Cinderella-ish in that way, and I was kind of flown out here, and I was with a bunch of, they weren't celebrities yet, but
Matt Damon.
Yeah, Matt Damon.
He was nobody
Chris
at that point.
O'Donnell. Yeah, he had done like one film. But yeah, there was a bunch of us flown out from the East Coast for this
Wild.
test. Yeah,
And
it
it's
was
just
kinda
no
surreal.
grounding at that point. I mean, I was a mess.
No.
18, I was totally a mess at that point.
Yeah, I mean, who has it together at 18? Some of these new generations, though.
No, I don't know
telling you,
either.
some of
I
these
think
kids, I'm like,
I know.
look at you.
Vibrationally.
Like, teach me what you know. But yeah, I think I was I was deeply insecure. I felt deeply judged. I felt like I had to be this thing that they wanted me to be, and I didn't have enough sense of myself at that point to know how to navigate that. And so there was a lot of speculation at that time. I was signing contracts with Paramount and whatnot, and are you going to quit school and move out to LA and be an actress? And I was like, no, I'm not. I really need to. I knew myself well enough to know that wouldn't have served me well.
That was prophetic, because I'm not sure who would have turned down an offer. I mean, in hindsight, it just seems kind of mature for that age. I mean, as opposed to just sort of just jumping off the deep end and taking the contract and going with it. Well, it wasn't like you were going for law or medicine. I mean, you were going into a liberal. It was still just English lit.
Sure, right.
But you did that. I mean, in some ways, that was. But what you had not yet tapped into Kundalini yoga at that point.
No, I had started meditation a little bit. Yeah, so there was definitely a curiosity. There was definitely a quest, a seeking. But no, I had not at that point. So.
Pat Martino, a great guitar player. He was having really severe headaches in the 70s, and back then, psychotherapists or just in general, our sort of mentality as a country at that time, he was thrown into mental institutions. They thought he was depressed, and they were giving him electric shock therapy. And he was still like one of the, next to John McLaughlin, he was arguably one of the greatest probably the greatest guitar player on the planet at that time. And then in 1980, he moved to California, moved up to Berkeley, thought the sun might help him, and he was just raging inside, and his brain was on fire, and he wound up in a hospital bed, and the doctor said, if we don't operate in 2 hours, your brain's going to explode. You have a tumor the size of a pear behind your ear. So here it is, the entire time he's been put into wards, shock therapy, and then when he came out of the surgery, he didn't know how to play the guitar. And he had all these guitars around the house, and he had all these awards, and it meant nothing to him. Long and short of it is he worked himself back 7 years later, back on the bandstand, and today, knock on wood, he's a dear friend, and he's on fire, okay? And he's about as deeply spiritual person as I've ever met in my life. But the point is, he talked about the activation of when you're at the bottom of the pit is the best place to be. Because it's the only, realism is activated at that point. When he came out of that coma after the surgery, he could have hired lawyers and filed lawsuits against all those institutions that did stuff. That's one direction to go in, right?
Sure.
But what a waste of time.
Right. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about being maybe at the bottom of the pit, or where, a place where you were, and really where you realized that's where realism was activated for you, and there was nowhere to go but up?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, so eventually I did get my English degree, and I did move to New York City.
That's awesome. Yeah, you're a great. I mean, it's coming in handy with the screenwriting. There's no doubt about it.
Thank you. Yeah. And you know what? To delve into the human condition in literature, I don't think is ever wasted time. So I enjoyed it a great deal.
Yeah.
But I was out here. Then eventually I moved out here to Los Angeles, and I was auditioning and being an actress occasionally, but mostly being a waitress, which was, I think everybody at some point should work in the service industry.
I agree.
You'll never.
I didn't do well in it, but I did it for a minute.
I was not a great waitress, but I did it. So I remember one night things were tough, and I was really struggling with, why am I doing this? Why am I, slogging through these nights of cocktail waitressing? I remember one night in particular, I was going through a lot of stuff. I wasn't booking much work as an actress yet. I was going through some breakup. I don't remember all the particulars, but I my shift started at 10 p.m. that night, and I was just like, I mean, kill me, right? Like, the last thing I want to do is go put on this, like, hoochie outfit and go in and carry a tray with a bunch of drunk, like, you know, coked up
Till
people.
5 in the morning.
I mean, it was brutal.
Just a nightmare.
Brutal. Yeah, so I really was like, this is the last thing I want to do. And I actually remember dropping down to my knees and praying. I mean, truly just...
surrendering.
Yeah, and just said, please give me a sign. If I am going to be okay, if God is with me, if you're there anywhere, please just give me something, because I am really rock bottom right now. I feel like crap. Are you ready for this one? Okay. I went into work that night, and I was working this club, and there was a supper club in the front, and then there was this huge dance club, but that didn't open till later. So I was in there. It was very dark, and there was like bartender, you know, bar back, walking in and out, and I was just standing kind of in the mostly dark, you know, against the bar, and in this big empty room, and I hear this voice behind me, and this man says, do you have any idea how much God loves you? And I turn around, and there's this tall, elegant African-American gentleman dressed in a suit. And I said, but why did you just say that? And he said, God told me to come tell you. And I was just, woo, you know, and I started to cry.
And you still had to work your shift.
And I mean, I had,
that doesn't matter. That's
no,
so
truly.
unbelievable story.
You know, and
that's beautiful.
I had, you know, I just said, I can't tell you how much I needed that right now. And he said, yeah, I know. And he told me some other things, and you know, it was very electric, and it felt very.
He was a patron, or just kind of appeared at, probably just divine.
I mean,
you've never seen him again after that.
I never saw him again. I'm not saying he was an angel or a spirit or anything like that, but he was an angel in body, where I had been half an hour before praying for a message, and that angel human, whatever he was, picked that up and said, you know, here's a sign. And so I think those experiences, which I've been fortunate to have numerous, what I would deem miracles, or, you know, however, you know, we can look at anything as either meaning nothing or being a miracle, right? And so the more you start to see the miracles, the more they start to show themselves. And
the truth always reveals itself. Can you riff on the third eye a little bit? I've always been intrigued by the third eye.
Yeah, so the third eye is your pituitary gland, right? The center of the forehead here. When I teach it to kids, I explain it. It's how when you close your eyes and you can picture a rainbow, right? It's when you close your eyes and you can picture your dog. It's that inner vision. And so when we do Kundalini Yoga, most of the time your eyes are closed. Most of the time you're tapping into that space. And so in the same way, if you're working a muscle continuously, that muscle is going to be more available to you. It's going to be stronger. It's going to be more accessible and capable. In the same way, tuning into your third eye does that for your intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And your intuition is going to speak differently to you than mine does to me, right? So the more you get in touch with the nuances and the subtleties of how your intuition works, the more that you're going to have availability of it.
How do you wind up, I mean, explaining it to the kids is one thing, but how do you talk to the layperson about essentially how to access that, you know, on a realistic level, on a level that's authentic and not what you, it's not some, you know, it's not fake, it's real, that you're really accessing that true nature.
But again, I think that's experiential, right? Like, don't take my word for it, you know, try it. So I often offer to people, like, you can keep your eyes closed this whole class and you're going to have a certain experience. You can keep your eyes open the whole class, you're going to have a certain experience. You can keep your eyes tuned in at your third eye point and you're going to have a certain experience. So try each one, you know, and see how it feels, and see what feels better. You know, I think in the beginning when I started, I would just sit there looking around and, you know, and then as I started to progress through it and do more and have a little more self-discipline, because so much of it is self-discipline. So many people say, oh God, you know, I could run however many miles, but to sit there with myself, no thank you, you know? And that can be tough.
Libby, what is the habitual nature that you're still trying to break?
You mean bad habits?
Yeah.
Oh, sugar, coffee, I don't know.
I guess in some ways it's like, I received the Tao 6 years ago, and it fundamentally changed my life, Taoism, and it, you know, and it's unquantifiable, and there's no words to describe it, but it put me on my path towards true nature, and that's why I'm sitting here now, just doing what I'm on this sacred journey. And I'm still fighting my habitual natures, the desires that you talk about, the things that we wind up with. But so I guess maybe a better question is, what are you still trying to work on and cultivate as a teacher that you're still really trying to refine?
Well,
and you've been teaching for how many years? 12 or 3?
I've been teaching for 11 years.
11 years of Kundalini Yoga. So that's over a decade. That's a lot. But
practicing for over 20. But I mean, we are always a work in progress, right? Part of my process is accepting my faults, you know, accepting my flaws, accepting my fallibilities, accepting my desires. I mean, that's one thing that I really appreciate about Yogi Bhajan's teachings, was it wasn't a damning, it wasn't a shaming practice. It wasn't, if you're not this, then you're not worthy kind of thing. Yes, it's very much about commitment and self-discipline, but there's a great story about Yogi Bhajan when in the early days when they were very stoic and they very much followed exactly what he said, and he said, I want everybody, because someone asked him, what about desire, right? The Buddha teaches we should be desireless, we should be without want. And he said, take a deep breath and now exhale. And he said, now hold your exhale. And he walked out of the room. And they're all and he walked back and he said, what do you want? You want a breath. And that's okay. You're in a human body. You want, and it's normal to want, and it's okay to want. It's how you want and what you do with that, right? And so I appreciate that teaching, because that never stuck for me. I always thought, well, desireless, you know, what does that mean exactly? How do you do that? So I appreciate that approach to it, that it's like you can have wants, you can have desires, but it's how you manifest them. And the way he explained it too was, when you raise your vibration, you magnetize to you the resources, the connections, the opportunities that will serve you at that vibration. You don't have to struggle in the same way. Your karma becomes dharma. Karma is a cycle of reactivity, right? Dharma is an elevated path of magnetizing.
Now we're really starting to go somewhere now.
Right.
This isn't, well, I still don't, we're going to have to vet that even further at some point. Yogi Bhajan seems to fly below the radar as a guru. Can you speak to his lineage in meditative teachings and what he ultimately meant to you in the time that you did study with him?
You know, I don't know if he would even use the term guru. I think he would...
Teacher?
Yeah, teacher. I think, because the term guru, I mean, even though in the Gurmukhi language, the guru is what takes you from darkness to light, right? And in that sense, but I think we have kind of a misnomer of a misunderstanding of what guru means. It's almost like this giving your power away.
Or tell me how to be.
Exactly.
Right.
And to that extent, if you are giving your power away to someone, giving your own authority away to someone else, are you really free? That's the biggest question I have for people, is if you're not making your own choices, why are how are you evolving when you've given that authority to someone else? Do
you think that requires some kind of awakening? Someone may not even be aware of that.
For sure. I think many, many, many are not, right? But I would always question a teacher that would take advantage of that.
And there are plenty that do, but he did not.
I can't speak to that directly.
I like that answer. I love that answer.
That's not my experience with him. I did not know him for long.
Right.
We had a very brief encounter, and the funny thing at the time, I was like, "What does this guy know?" I was very much looking for a female, someone I wanted to emulate,
divine,
look up to, kind of Earth Mother energy. So I was like, men, but he. He cut right through that, and so
wow.
I feel like since his passing, which was in 2004, I have a deeper connection with him in spirit and through the teachings.
I just wanted you to give a word of inspiration to. I have 2 young daughters. I love them dearly. They changed my life forever, and but I just want you to speak to women around the world. I mean, I think sexism is still raging in our society, and the patriarchal. Some people would say we're seeing the last vestiges of the screaming patriarchal society going down the tubes, and that's a good thing. I don't know if that's true or not. Only that time will play out. But I'd like you to give some word. You are a divine woman, and you've been on this planet longer than me, and I'd like you to give some words of encouragement to women that are being suppressed around the world.
Thank you for that. It's funny when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about today for International Women's Day. I'm on the board of a committee called Knockout Abuse, and it's a fundraiser, awareness raiser about domestic violence and oppression of women in that way, and physical violence and all the ways that manifests. And what I wrote to my friend was, may our daughters be raised in a society where they truly feel fortunate to have been born female. May we get to the point where you feel like that is a blessing, not a curse. That there's so much to be gained from holding the space of a female in this world. And I think it's possible. I think we're getting there, and there's certainly a lot of pushback from the old ways, old systems, old powers that be, certainly. But at the end of the day, the male energy is served when the female energy is honored and revered. The divine masculine does not thrive in a society that oppresses or holds women in prison. And so I think ultimately that's something that has to happen for our collective evolution, to uplift us all.
I mean, you consider yourself a happy warrior as it relates to this? You think it's you've been an activist going back to your days at UVM. I mean, it's not something you're not a politician, but do you feel like, how do you do, aside from being on a board, I mean, do you have a chance to talk to not even your students, but just young girls in general about what you just talked about?
I feel very well.
I just was going to say, I'm a Gen Xer, but I do feel like it's a blessing to be born as even though I'm not, to
have daughters.
To be born as a female, but there are societies
that's very much a curse.
Yeah, and so, yeah. What for those that are struggling, and they don't have any power to really get out of it. Mind over matter. So, talk to them about some of the techniques, especially yogic techniques, that they can use to persevere, become mentally strong in order to persevere and get beyond where they are at right now.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm very lucky that I too am a parent to a daughter, and what I see in her is this unwavering self-confidence that's just innate. Like, she is so fiercely her own self and so confident in who she is, and I don't see herself through that lens that I was speaking about in terms of when I was thrust into Hollywood and all that. She doesn't judge herself in that way, off billboards or Instagram accounts, that kind of thing. She has this.
There's a deeper level.
Rooted, deeply rooted, and I hope that more women, more young girls will activate that part of themselves that won't be influenced by the inevitable pitfalls of insecurities and ways that media and things like that can start to erode their self-esteem and make them buy into believing they have to be a certain way to be loved, valuable, or appreciated.
Right. Or even just a terrible life experience too. I mean, that's the part that doesn't matter how unwavering your confidence is. I mean, you know.
For sure.
Could be a
And that
sporting
we as
accident,
parents,
could be
yeah,
violated
always-
or whatever, you know.
Yep. Have enough awareness to keep that space of protection and you know, all that for them.
Before I let you go, you're on your way to Monmouth to go skiing in mountains of snow, but what is your concept of love?
Love is I think we, you know, overuse the word or misuse the word or objectify the word even, that it has to be this thing, and that love is an attachment or love is a neediness, right? Ultimately, the vibration of love is the highest energy there is. The opposite vibration being fear. You know, so when you hold that space, you're in that that elevated state of magnetizing more to yourself, right? And one thing about romantic love, Yogi Bhajan said to me, as long as you hold God in your heart, you will never be heartbroken again. And so I know, you know, it seems obvious, but if you truly understand that, if you truly get to experience that and allow that in yourself, it's, you know, life-changing.
Can you give a mantra as we close out here?
Certainly. So every Kundalini class, we sing a song. I won't sing it for you, but I'll give you the words. And we first bless ourselves, and I usually ask them to offer it out to someone perhaps you'd like to pray for, or someone you'd like to heal with. And lastly, we send this song blessing out to the planet. The words are, "May the long-time sun shine upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on." Satnam.
Love you, Libby. Thank you so much for being part of the program.
Love you, Jake.
It's the Jake Feinberg Show. See you later.